Hi everyone, my name is Nairi Kurdolian. Thank you for joining this new session of the Supply Chain Leaders webinar series today. Firstly, a big thank you to our speaker, Ulf Gerkens, Head of Supply Chain Planning at Sennheiser. Ulf, you joined Sennheiser Electronic GmbH in the year 2000, where you designed and established the organization for global supply chain planning. You built the sales forecasting, distribution planning, and sales and operations planning processes, and were responsible for implementing the advanced planning systems to drive those processes. In your role as head of global supply planning, you are responsible for the S&OP process for the company. FutureMaster really appreciates you taking the time to share with us your experiences of how you achieve high visibility of customer demand throughout the supply network with the SCP Pitch project. The presentation will last about 30 minutes and will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions as we go through the presentation, you can ask them in the Q&A section of your screen. I'll now hand over to Ulf to begin the presentation. Thank you, Ulf.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure. And yeah, so I'll share some thoughts and learnings of our project here in, as you mentioned, the next half hour. And so actually here's the picture of myself. And so the flow of thoughts goes along like these 6 points of the agenda. So first, a short introduction of the company Sennheiser and its development, to then continue with now what are the challenges of our supply chain that we want to address. And that leads into the very project we're talking about here, which is all about supply chain planning. And we created that nice title SB Pitch. I'll tell you in a minute what that stands for. And then it goes into like what the real title of today's presentation is. So visibility of customer demand throughout the supply network is kind of the focus of what we achieved there, to talk about what we did already achieve and to end with some key learnings. So having said that, first point, the company, just a few points about that. So the company is, like, I would say, kind of a pretty typical German technology-driven company, being founded in the year 1945 in this nice old building in the north of Hanover. Like in today's world, this modern, nice building is where we're in, like if we're not sitting in home offices, most of us do. Now, you see in this one statement what the company's Sennheiser really stands for. So shape the future of audio. So it's all about audio. It's about the unique sound experience, and very importantly, it's about customers and bringing audio sound to customers. A few words about the numbers, and I'll keep that section short just to give you an idea of the size of the company and its footprint. So the number of 2019, you see like the turnover of Sennheiser is in the range of 700 million euro, with good growth in the years 18, 19 here, 20 is not yet released. Well, obviously, now the most recent years were a challenge for the whole market, and it was for us. And what I would say in terms of supply chain planning, it's the time where planning becomes very important. In terms of regions, Sennheiser has, as I guess most of the company of that size and in these type of markets, a global footprint. Once founded in Germany, the German market is still the most important one. The EMEA market is, with a little more than half of the global turnover. Then we did have an expansion into the American markets many years ago, so that's a very strong market for us indeed. And again, as I guess in most of comparable companies, the Asian market is the big growing market, the challenge for supply chain as well. The Sennheiser business is split into two divisions: the professional division on one side, which is about half of the turnover, and then you see our most recent product, the EW Digital here, and the consumer business, is you might have read that in press, by end of the year, Sennheiser sells its consumer business to the Swiss-based hearing aid company Sonova, so that the company will go two different directions. And in the next, I'm rather talking about the professional part of the business, which is the more complex supply chain wise, and will stay under Sennheiser. The business is split into 4 business divisions, so the consumer part on one side, and then the professional business runs under 3 different business units, which have all a pretty different footprint. So the professional audio, which is stage business from lower end to absolute high end, like from the hobby musician up to the big TV shows or stages, and the audio for video, so camera and microphones. Then the business communication, so like conference centers, universities, and the brand Neumann, which is high-end microphones for studios. The supply chain into that is like, if we take these 2 dimensions, production sites, we're running 4 factories. The headquarter in Germany, which is a small village north of Hanover here. We do have a factory in Ireland, one in Albuquerque, USA, and now for a few years in Brașov, Romania, a growing factory in a like low salary country, Romania. On the other side, these 4 factories distribute through now 4 distribution sites. Again, like in the 4 regions where we have, with our partner Avarto, 4 different central distribution centers, and trying to concentrate all the inventory distribution there. Which brings me into, well, the supply chain, and specifically the challenges for the supply chain. So you already saw a bit of the footprint of the supply chain on the previous page. The challenges come from the 3 different professional business units now. So on the professional audio side, and here, like, talking about challenges and opportunities specifically in the time we're currently running through. So the professional audio is highly transaction based, and the retail business, the high turnover, fast moving business, is an ever growing part of that. The challenge, and everybody dealing with electronics knows that the electronic component market these days is extremely difficult. So if you open a newspaper, you'll see all the line shutdowns in car industry, and that's the big challenge on that side. Opportunity, of course, I mean, we do see stages open. There is peak demand to be expected, and the opportunity is like the company that has inventory will win the game there. On the business communication side, I mean, so on one side it's a very dynamic business, so conference centers become more and more important, and of course now specifically in the pandemic times, we all learned how important video conferences are, and so that is a very challenging, very a big opportunity market. In the Neumann side, so like we came from a high-end products, complex production, workshop style production, which is now very hard to scale. We need to scale because what we learned now that the home studio market grows very fast. So that's kind of a new market. People start producing their own YouTube videos at home and want to have good equipment for that. So that's a very interesting challenge to scale this type of workshop production. So we figured that in these 3 professional businesses, we do have 3 like very different challenges and need to tailor the supply chain to fit with all these different challenges. How did we do that? We did set up a supply chain planning project, a transformation of our supply chain, mainly starting from the planning point. And we did that together and based on FutureMaster software. It started, and I'll on the next page, I'll tell you a little bit more about the history and what all the parts are. But we started with understanding what is it that our customers want from us. And we identified 4 different areas, which are to some extent contradicting. And I think one of the big tasks there is to find the right equilibrium to so not do something extreme in one direction and lose the other end. So availability is very important, and you saw that in some business even more than in others. But the point is not to have a huge amount of inventory and be able to deliver everything every time, but to have it in the right position and to avoid that you're not able to supply and lose sales opportunities. Going in line with the cost part of it, and cost inventory is cost in the moment when you have to devaluate it, if you have inventory that does not move. So avoid that you have overstock that you really can't sell. And very important, be efficient in the planning organization as such. So on the other side, reliability is one of the things that came up during the project. We identified that reliability is absolute key, and that was a key learning from us as well, how important it is and how increasingly important it is to be totally reliable. So reliable delivery dates to customers, and understand what the priorities in the market are, be able to manage priorities and do your decisions based on priorities. And then, I mean, you've seen that. We have different challenges, different markets. We have to have the right process in each business and have to have a multitude of processes that we can apply to different challenges. So that's why we defined this SAP pitch project, and you can see how that reads out. It has to have 3 different legs. You need software, yes, but together with process changes, together with organizational changes. None of these 3 can stand alone. It always has to be these 3 legs at the same time. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And that's why we had this SAP pitch, process, IT, change. That brings me to the very project. And I'll run you a bit through the project, starting with, we figured that to trigger the change, it is important to have some leading principles. And that turned out to be very helpful. So we identified that on one side, we used to have like roles in our planning organization that had like one person doing everything from planning to execution. And we figured one way to win is to split these roles to different people and have clear service relationships between pure planning people and pure what we called coordination people. We figured, as I just mentioned, reliability is a total key. And reliability, and you find that in the next one, so we used to have a principle of being super flexible. Whenever a new customer demand comes up, react to it as fast as you can. And we learned that is not the best thing to do. So having stable plans, defend those plans and be reliable is at least as important. And that's a big supply chain planning task then. One thing is, like if you're arguing with people, and then I guess you all know that, everybody will tell you, we can't do this because there is this one case where it doesn't work. So like one thing, I'm personally a great fan of that is, so forget the exception, run with the normal first and then the exception. Service between the different roles, planning and coordination, and yes, keep it simple, which is kind of, I would say, against the culture we all grown up with, but keep things simple to make it work. We had those design principles in that as a kind of a leading picture. And then we did run through a multi-step project here. And you see, split it here into a phase that I called analyze, understand, define, which, and worth mentioning, we all did that with our internal experts. We decided to do this without like a consulting company as such. We started off with identifying we do have an old supply chain planning software that we needed to replace, is no longer supported. It was already a software that had optimizers in and so on, so we had a bit of experience on that side. And we started off and then identified, well, it's really not just about replacing a software. If we're honest to ourselves, we don't achieve our targets that we have, like in terms of reliability, delivery performance, inventory targets. There's a bunch of things that we defined as our targets that we measure, but we don't really achieve. So there's more into it. So we decided to look a little deeper and understand on one side what is up there in the software market, assuming that software companies have like 20, 30 years experience eventually, and we can learn quite a bunch from them, which turned out to be correct. So we went into understanding best-in-class solutions. We had lots of presentations from software companies. We visited companies with great solutions, and out of that, we figured it's absolutely worth to do a bigger step. It's not just about replacing a software, it's about changing our whole supply chain planning organization, processes, approach. So then we started this journey with defining the future this supply chain planning organization. And actually one of the first things in the real change we did was like filling roles, hiring people, or assigning people that we had already, to be honest in this one, and start from having the experts in place and together with them starting to design the new process organization software. The other thing we did pretty early then is run through a process of strategy map, KPIs, principles, the ones that I just showed, to have the guiding light to know where we want to go and to define the targets that we want to design the process and the software for. Again, that turned out to be a wise move here. Only then actually we went down to really deeply analyzing like who would be the right software partner for us to run through this process. And we started with actually kind of together with that, and that went on for a while, to do process design workshops. Since we figured that like if we do detailed process design workshops earlier on, we might find ourselves with nicely designed processes that we're never able to implement. So that's what we said, let's learn first what's feasible. Let's learn first what's best in class. Let's be clear like who should be our partner, and then do the nitty-gritty process design. So then we have processes that we can really implement. And implement is the word here. So then we went into implementing. So reorganization of the supply chain planning organization is one of the things that we did early, implementing new KPIs, starting to measure, make it visible to people, like where are we, where do we want to go, was a very early point. And we do a two-step go live together with FutureMaster then. First is the distribution planning part of it. And that actually is live since early this year, and we're currently in the middle of implementing a production planning solution. And so we have some bits and pieces implemented and are on the way to fully implement it. Well, which brings me to the point of now, how do we achieve high visibility throughout the network, which is kind of two different points. So having the visibility in the whole network, and have visibility. And so you remember, and you have this nice chart up here, it's all about like 3 legs: software, process, organization. So like on the next 3 pages, I'll talk about these 3 points, starting with organization, since that was the first thing we decided, the first thing we started implementing. So what we identified, we really have, if you want, like 4 different layers of processes, 4 different layers of responsibilities and roles in each of the role, delivering a service for the other role. So we identified that we have a technical planning process. And in the introduction you heard, I built up the sales and operations planning process for Sennheiser, and I'm responsible for that. So that is really what this stands for. So a clearly dedicated, well-defined, what we call master supply planning process. And that is all about like a 3 to 12 months out. once per month, agree a new plan, identify the new challenges, and align on a scenario that the whole organization will work against. Actually, we implemented that role. We brought a new person assigned to this master supply planning role and based on data and processes to run a very systematic sales operations planning process. The second part, and this is actually kind of a key in here, we did have an S&OP process. We did not really have what here now called an operational planning process. We had production planners, purchase planners, which did like steering the production, steering the purchase, and then doing some kind of planning. But we figured that a key for success is to have dedicated persons that have the time on one side and the data with the new FutureMaster software on the other side to have like an end-to-end perspective and like be a bit away from the pure operation, have the opportunity to think about like how should we steer these, how should we set planning parameters to drive into the right direction. You see another role that we implemented formally aside to that is an application architect, like a person that knows a lot about software and knows how to implement processes in software and has a deep understanding of processes to have like a continuous improvement in a formal role. And I think that's another key to success here. Then we have this, what we now call coordination role. And we discussed a long time how to call this, but coordinate seems to be the best word for this. So here we have like the people in between the pure planners and like the real execution, like the work center in the manufacturing and so on. People translating the plan into reality. And then here in this whole, like while we have more roles at the end, the whole organization is more efficient than it used to be, since we have clearly dedicated roles with good processes, good data that can essentially run more efficient. You see, and I mentioned the second part, the production optimization is still going on, so that will take until next year before it's fully implemented, but all the rest is implemented and it shows performance. Well, and here again, we have an application support, and that's more on the ERP level then. Talking about the second point, software. Now, what is the key point in software? Trying to explain what you see in here, like we have kind of 3 layers of software, which is on one side a demand planning software. What we used to have is a distribution planning software that was already with a linear programming and optimizer, but did only cover distribution planning. And one of the key points then is to extend the scope of these advanced planning system optimizers into production planning, into purchase planning, into more and more decision making. So this part here in the middle used to be in our ERP system, and we've taken it out of that ERP system more and more into a supply chain planning system based on FutureMaster then, to have the ERP system that has only covered transactions. So we're taking now step by step all planning functions, all decision makings out of the traditional ERP system into the advanced planning solutions. And that is described over here. So the first part is done. The second is in the process of implementation right now. So one point in this distribution planning is modeling the demand throughout the whole global network, so that model the full network with all opportunities, with all lanes, with all decision points in the software. A key point then is, and we didn't have that before, propagate demand priorities from customer to plant, and I'll talk about that in a minute a little more, so that we have full visibility of like what is the plant producing? Is it producing for a customer or only to fill up stock? And very importantly, the optimizer helps to make decisions, to support decisions, and And freight is a big point. In a global network, freight is a very important cost factor and time factor. And the second part, and parts of that are implemented, parts of that are still in the making, the production constraints. So I have like a fully realistic plan of the production, and we, in the last week, we just implemented that in some key work centers, in our most constrained work centers, and to bring this like in a totally, like in a total picture of the supply chain with all the constraints, and again, use the optimizers in here. So that's kind of the development we're doing, extend the advanced planning solution more and more, introduce the traditional ERP system to transactions, take all the decisions out of that. And here comes the third, like the processes, trying to sketch these very complex things into one picture. So the key point, and I choose the example, which is kind of the most extreme, but the one that we now recently changed. Here we have Australia, and we have the customer with a crown, like the customer is always the king in the whole network, of course, and the factory in Germany. And the point is we model the different types of demand. In this case, in the Australian market, we identify where do we have customer orders that we need to replenish, where do we have a sales forecast, so expected customer orders, and where do we fill safety stock to be prepared for any uncertainties in future. We model these throughout the whole network. On the way, one of the most important decision factors is, can we use the normal low-cost, long lead time sea freight, or do we have to fly? That is one very important factor. Airplane is faster, but far more expensive. To load this into the factory, and factories are always constrained, factories can never do everything they should. And you say to do things in the factory then in the right sequence, right priority, and then you see this 3 different colors and again here. And that is really, in a very simplified picture, I would say, the way it, like in the processes, we see like a very realistic distribution model which helps us to follow like the true priorities to make like an optimizer-based decision. All right, like in summary, you see like the first part of the process is done. Of course, we use this nice studio picture here on air. So in February, we implemented the distribution planning part of it. We use all the algorithms, the linear programming optimization to follow the customer demand, make automatic decision to, most importantly, to show in the receiving warehouses for weeks out what is the expected arrival of goods based on customer priorities, and then go into the second part, the next months on production planning. Which brings me to business results. And I mentioned a whole lot of that already. So it starts with inventory, like by allocating inventory to the right places on better decision making. We went down a few 5 percentage points roughly here. Through more efficient planning organization and better decision making in the freight mode, we're down about 5% there. The customers do say plus 10% more reliable promises. Actually, the challenge we're having here is in times of COVID, it's very hard to distinguish the uncertainties as we have it from the improvements. One big change we did is we brought the Australian warehouse into the network, which was good reduction of inventory there. Demand priorities are visible, and one thing is the whole distribution model is far more flexible. On each item, we can define lanes and make it fully flexible. Which brings me to the last page, the key learning page. So based on like these project that went for a few years even, and what are the key points we learned? Actually, we learned a tremendous amount of things. So on one side, yes, an IT project should never be just a software project. It's always about process change, organizational change supported by software. Otherwise, a software project specifically in the realm of supply chain planning will never be successful. One thing is we figured you learn while you change. So I think that the whole process landscape of supply chain planning is so complex that we figured we have to do something, test, define the next steps, and learn. And that ties into a supply chain planning process is never a straightforward process. It's like a bunch of circles of different speed that tie into each other. And so like, you know, like a customer order process, you have like a step-by-step flow of processes. In planning, it's always multiple complex processes tying into each other. One thing is we did small pilot runs on flip charts and Excel, and we learned a tremendous amount of things in supported change management. On the technical part, and that is everybody doing IT project knows that the interface is always where the meat is, where the complexity is that you tend to underestimate. And coming back to my principal page, key performance indicators, it helped us tremendously to define some principles, some performance indicators earlier on in a project, to have like the light already there, like and follow it. And finally, there's the big thing of there is a point in time when you have to jump. Like I've seen many supply chain planning projects failing because the jump was never done, and people started to design their own Excel sheets, bypass the solution. So at one point in time, you have to have the courage to do the big jump so that you can't go back. Yeah, thanks for listening. And
thank you very much, Ulf. Yeah. Yes, we're now going to start the Q&A session. Thank you very much, Ulf, for this presentation and for sharing your insight with us today. It was very clear and quite impressive. So we received many questions from the attendees. We're going to try to respond to as many as possible during this 50-minute Q&A session. So let's start with the first questions. A couple of attendees asked why you choose FutureMaster to work with.
Yeah, thanks. A pretty obvious question, I guess. And yeah, I think it was we did a pretty hard process to follow that through. But one of the key points was cultural fit. Like we understood early on in the process, you choose people you want to work with very closely for a couple of years. So you should have trust and the feeling these are the people you want to work with, and that was like a good fit with FutureMaster, and FutureMaster didn't pay me for that statement. And I think like the other thing on the technical side, FutureMaster was one of the few software vendors that were able to offer a distribution planning software, optimizer for distribution planning and for supply planning. There aren't too many out in the market being able to do that. And the other thing is we felt like the FutureMaster software is like developed inside and different from like companies that buy different software pieces that don't really fit together. So we felt like here is the right bit of things that we could trust in.
Okay, thank you. So why is it a strategic aim for you to improve customer demand visibility?
Yeah, like the market is changing very fast, and like one of the typical things we're seeing these days is it becomes ever more difficult to like forecast demand. I mean, like the pandemic times made it extremely difficult to forecast demand. That's one thing. The other is, well, the customers become more and more demanding. So the competition is getting even more fierce year by year. And so customers really rely on like reliability. They just don't, they're not pleased anymore to getting products. They want to have like a reliable supplier and so on. So that makes it all harder and harder. So customer demand visibility is the key to achieve all that.
Okay. So you were mentioning the COVID-19. So how did you deal with the fast and unexpected changes due to COVID-19 in the supply chain planning?
Yeah, I think that was a big challenge for all of us. While, you know, like in calm times, people tend to forget why planning is so extremely important. In these difficult times, people remember that. So in a way, it was a good time for supply chain planners, I would say. Well, how did we deal with that? I mean, we on one side it was the high time for the S&OP, so we switched from a monthly S&OP cycle to a weekly S&OP cycle for some time. So like week by week, we figured like, how does the market develop? Where do we have the biggest challenge? What is that we should produce next? And where should we ship our products to? That turned out to be a weekly decision process, and we were able to react to that part. And the other thing is risk taking. Like in the early days, we had a clear guideline of keep inventory low to reduce risk. And we decided about like what are our opportunity areas. So we, through again like the whole supply chain planning process and systems, we set like planned inventory, like extra inventory for some opportunity products that we were able to follow them.
Okay. So now a question about your industry. So what are the main challenges for sourcing your electronic components, and how do you address these?
Yeah, electronic components. I think I mentioned that already. Like you see in a newspaper, a lot of industries really struggling from that. I think the key point for electronic component purchase these days, you have to have a very long-term planning. So you have to deal with lead times of 6 months, 12 months even. So you have to have a very clear, aligned, agreed production plan, sales plan, and then sourcing plan for your products, and you have to be able to align supply chain with sales. So again, that is something that we could make transparent and align plans, which then again are documented in planning systems for like 12 months out. The second part of that is a good relationship to suppliers. And here I can only talk about what my great colleagues in purchasing tell me, but we do have like a long-term, very close relationship to electronic parts suppliers, and we could build on that and well get their support as an highly estimated customer.
Okay. So you mentioned silos as an issue in your presentation. So how did you manage to break down the silos in the organization?
Yeah, breaking down the silos, that's I think always a challenge, and it goes into, well, we did have to do a lot of organizational changes, like move people out of their role that they used to have for many years, that they know, that they understand, and well, convince them to do a different job, which is a personal risk. So I think a lot of that is well, having the management behind you, having the responsible managers together with the project team or in front of the project team at any point in time to tell the people this is where we want to go. And that is something we did with the project team a lot, really making sure that the responsible line managers really are behind the project, behind the organizational change. And like one event that we did is that we brought all the well, supply chain planning people, everybody who's kind of involved into that together in our theater, and you've seen that on the very first page on Nice Theater, and have like the responsible line manager standing in front of them explaining where we go with a clear statement of this is what I'm expecting from an organization. I'm fully convinced this is the right thing to do. Like, so the line managers together with the project team, that is a absolute key for that.
Okay, very good. So you had a slide regarding the key learnings, but we have a question here regarding, it's quite similar. So the key success factors during the DRP implementation.
Yeah, the key success factors is, yeah, maybe, well, to add something to the points I mentioned already, I think one of the key success factors was the project organization. Like, we followed very strict principles of good project organization, and flowers go to our project manager here, so that's not on me. So like having installed a steering committee together on one side with the management level from FutureMaster, and again with the line managers on our side. And that ties into my previous answer on, so this is a way to involve the line management, be sure that the line managers are behind the project at any time. Well, then I think it's close relationship, making sure that people trust each other, and that's true for the Sena as a team together with FutureMaster. And I think that was very important. But on the other hand, like, really take the time to, well, plan the project. It's about supply chain planning. So you would assume that people can plan. Clear planning, then steering committee meetings where we openly talk about issues, and we absolutely did that. Do changes fast, making sure via clear project organization structure that the risk and change are understood by everybody, and everybody backs it up. And to be honest with each other on things that don't work.
Okay, thank you. Now you mentioned the decision-making process, improving decision-making process. So has FutureMaster implementation, so the SCP project, improved your decision-making processes?
Yeah, it certainly did. And I think, like, if you remember the picture I had with the airplane and the boat, that's one of the, I mean, it looks very easy on a slide. In reality, it's pretty complex. So like, if you ship like hundreds or even thousands of products through like Asia to Germany, Germany to Australia, and have to make a decision day to day on which product, which quantity should go on either airplane or boat, or actually we have now trains and trucks and everything. So that is an example where a person can never do a good decision. It's just too complex. So we built this decision making based on customer demand plus real cost of, for example, airplane versus ship, plus like really to be expected time to ship from one part of the globe to another part. We put it all in a model and have the system decide every day. And so the system is now able to do the decisions for us, based, of course, on the parameters that the planner is now a new role of the operational supply planner, but they put the rules in the system, and the system then delivers the decisions that everybody trusts in. So that is clearly a point. The other, of course, is visibility. So like a big change is in production, people see the production which are planned for this week. Is it for a customer demand, like a customer who's waiting, or is it just filling up inventory? Or vice versa, the customer service. Remember my picture that was Australia, the customer service can see for weeks out what are the deliveries out of the production that we can expect to have, that we can promise to our customers. So there's a whole bunch of better decisions, one's made on based on visibility, the other based on the optimizer, which was all its algorithms.
Okay, great. So one last question. How do you plan customer demand in the post-COVID era?
Yeah, hopefully everything will go up and be super stable then. But yeah, looking optimistically into that, I think we do take some learnings out of this time. Like, everybody understood like how volatile the world is, how sensitive customer demand is, the supply chain is with all its part to small changes. And so like one of the things we are already doing differently is we keep the demand picture more stable. We agree on more long-term aligned agreed demand pictures, since it's fully understood with an electronic component market that has 12 months lead time, you can't plan for like short notice big promotions and like challenge the supply chain with unpredicted demand. So that is one of the big changes we absolutely have in there. And I think the other one is well, we have a better understanding for risk decisions. We have more agreed, aligned risk decisions to put, for example, inventory of material in a factory of product somewhere to intentionally deal with opportunities and risk, be prepared for eventually unexpected demands, and really be able to deliver against that, and don't confuse the whole supply chain system with totally unexpected things. That I think is hopefully some a learning that everybody in the organization will keep.
Okay, well, thank you again, Ulf, for the presentation. And thank you for the attendees for joining us. So you were, just for your information, there were 730 registrants to the Sennheiser webinar. So congratulations, Ulf, for this very good figure. We are very much interested in having your feedback on this webinar. So please take a couple of minutes to fill in the evaluation survey that you will be shortly receiving. You will also receive a recording of the webinar by email tomorrow. Last but not least, our next Supply Chain Leaders webinar will be next week on the 8th of July and will be presented by Adisseo, a global leader in animal nutrition. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. We wish you a very good day or evening.